I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。
This morning I'm talking to you about finding our own path as an answer to a question from my son Aaron, who asked me, how is it you know that you're following the Tao path properly, correctly, if you will? How do you know that what you're doing and what you're cultivating in your life is the proper thing to be doing at the moment? And that's a remarkably salient and valid question, because oftentimes, due to the intensely personal nature of Tao cultivation, there isn't a lot of specific guidance about particular activities or pursuits, and so, it can become easy to get entangled in the minutia and embroiled in all kinds of self-doubt and second-guessing as we try to figure out whether or not we are cultivating the principles in the proper manner. Okay, so my arrow keys don't want to work this morning. Not a problem. There are a number of things that we can do to kind of assess at any given moment in time how we're doing on our path of Tao cultivation. Contrary to popular belief and the dogma of the Church of what's happening now, there actually are rules and if you will, a degree of protocol and procedure to be followed in Tao cultivation that allows us to apply some metrics to our lives and determine what the state of our cultivation is. There aren't a lot of philosophies where one can say that that's the case. This is one in particular where it's not just the case, it's actually remarkably easy to do, and it rests upon the observations regarding our lives measured against the standard that we perceive in the teachings of Lao Tzu. And so what I tend to look at, I guess, is the list on this slide: life progress, life synergies, which is a wonderful category, how I handle misfortune, and my relationships with other people, in particular, generally speaking, in relationships generally, because these things are indicative of how my life is going, and how my life is going is indicative of the state of my cultivation. Okay. When I talk about progress in life, we're all going somewhere at some velocity. Nobody's life is standing still. Okay? Whether or not we're making progress on the accomplishment of our goals and ideals for our lives, both in our secular lives and in our spiritual lives, is a pretty fair indicator at an earthly level, if you will, a mundane level, of the state of our Tao cultivation. Okay? If we're gaining ground, if we're making any forward progress at all, if we're learning to continue to put one foot in front of the other, and the results of doing that are hopefully more positive than negative, then we're probably going the right way. Our path is probably sound. If we're making mistakes from time to time, if we encounter failure every now and again, if we fall flat on our faces and then get up and continue to try again, we are probably going in the right direction. Some folks may consider that statement to be a mite unusual or perhaps unwarranted. But I'm going to tell you, in any endeavor where a degree of educational prerequisite exists, there is absolutely no forward progress without the commission of mistakes and the correction and refinement of errors. If nobody's making any mistakes, then we're not learning, we're not moving, we're not doing anything, and that's completely irrespective of the discipline involved. Okay, I've been involved in some form of martial training for over 40 years of my life. When I started, I wasn't anywhere near as proficient as I was after 10 years. And after 20 years, I was way more proficient than I was after 10. After 30 years, I'd realized that measuring the future based on the path in this particular pursuit was pointless. And trying to compare myself to other people was an exercise in frustration and futility. It wasn't until I'd been training for over 2/3 of my life that I was allowed to teach others. After about 30, 35 years. And I've been teaching now for going on 15 years or so. One of the hardest things to learn in those disciplines is not to compare ourselves to other people, their progress, their proficiency, their prowess, particularly in the group setting. We see people that are, for instance, in this example, much more athletic than we are, or in our opinion, much more beautiful, much more aesthetically pleasing to watch than we are. We perceive that in very many ways other people are better at the various disciplines than we are. And that serves to highlight only two things. The first one is the misconception of our progress compared to others. At the same time that we're making that self-assessment of our own proficiencies compared to those of others, the other folks are doing the same thing, only they're doing it with us. And neither of those comparisons is accurate. Not most of the time. And even if they're accurate, they're not really important. The important comparison is whether or not we are performing at our best. That is, we're doing the best we know how. And whether or not we're making every effort that we can to learn what we don't know and understand what it is that we don't know. There are so many of those things out there in life that it just plain isn't possible to come into either martial training or Tao cultivation with a predefined knowledge of everything there is to know. It just can't be done. And so that knowledge has to be acquired through practice and patience and perseverance and study and then more practice. And that practice, by definition, is going to cause us to make mistakes. So when I talk about falling flat on our faces, I don't talk about that in a negative or pejorative context, but rather in the context of the educational process. Human beings don't learn to do anything without making mistakes, no matter what it is. There very often is no success without a certain degree of failure. But it is that degree of failure driven by a motivation to succeed that eventually produces perfection. When I talk about synergy, it's something that you guys see here on a remarkably frequent basis, and yet very often it goes completely unnoticed. There's one almost perhaps insignificant synergy that occurs between Derek and I on more Sundays than I can count. And it has to do with what Derek and I are talking about on any given Sunday. More often than not, very frequently, Derek and I wind up talking about exactly the same thing, perhaps from two different perspectives, but still pretty much about the same stuff. Every now and again we'll overlap chapters of the Tao Te Ching, or we'll overlap topics, or we'll overlap stories. Derek and I, in all the years we've been doing this, have never compared notes or talked to each other about what we're talking about on the upcoming Sunday's Tao Study Group. Not once, not ever. The only exception to that, not that it's by some kind of contrivance, it just is the way it is, but the only exception to that is the joint meetings we have with the full Chinese congregation, and we only do it then because I have to talk and Derek has to translate, and it's difficult to do that without communicating with each other. That's synergy. Those synergies also occur in our lives when we're cultivating the teachings properly. Things happen. What I tell people is that in some miraculous way, the great Tao tends to extend a bit of latitude and a lot of slack for those of us who may not necessarily understand, but who are putting forth the effort to try and cultivate the teachings. And yes, I say that in a nearly personified context, but it saves an awful lot of words, and I haven't found a better explanation. It's almost like positive karma intervenes on our behalf to kind of help smooth things out and have the intention to positive result occur, even when we completely mishandle the practice involved in achieving it. Once again, completely an educational experience. I can't tell you the number of times I've been mortified or embarrassed by abusing one of the teachings, usually in the presence of witnesses, trying to do the right thing. And although the methodology was horribly flawed, the result was still very good. Oftentimes that counted on the forbearance, tolerance, and forgiveness of others, but at those times when it was necessary, it was there. Okay? Sometimes it has nothing whatsoever to do with how badly we mishandle an attempt at applying the teaching. Sometimes It just happens as a part of walking the path. And we don't realize that that synergy was there until we look backwards sometime later and realize that had those events not occurred, we wouldn't be where we are now. When I look back at the path of my life since I began cultivating the Tao teachings, I am always amazed at the number of times where those things have happened to me, and I didn't even realize it at the time. Maybe the only way to really see those things clearly is in hindsight. Maybe not, but for me, it's turned out to be the best mirror. I find that the closer I get to the teachings, the sharper and more clear and more reliable my intuition becomes. Sometimes to the point of being pretty doggone scary in terms of precision and accuracy. That's a function both of practice and relaxation, letting go, if you will. It's not something I've found that I can force into being, but if I still my mind and listen, I find that it's always there, and it's remarkably clear and correct. I think since ancient times, the cultivators of the Tao teachings, the folks who found and placed value in these teachings and practiced these disciplines, were able to produce those same sorts of results and became, in some cases, quite well renowned for the precision of that intuition. I think at some level, the practices of the I Ching may be based on that intuitive interpretation of the tools of divination. And I don't discount that as unworthy of our attention or respect, as I would perhaps some of the more modern New Agey fortune-telling sorts of disciplines, because there is actually a discipline behind learning to use the I Ching. But even for folks like myself who are not I Ching adepts, I find that my intuitive capabilities are amazing to me and quite helpful. And I find that if I'm not paying attention to the state of my cultivation, that's one of the first things that begins to suffer. My outlook on life has a lot to do with the previous topics as well. I do the best I can to be a half-full kind of guy. My sense of humor is remarkably dark and somewhat cynical, but my outlook on life is optimistic and positive. It's kind of a weird combination perhaps, but it works for me. The more positively I tend to look at life, the better things tend to work. And the more rigorously I attempt to apply the teachings and learn and understand them, the more optimistic and positive I'm able to be. I find that cultivating this path allows me to view other people with a lot less consternation and a lot more compassion. And that permits me the latitude to become more optimistic and more tolerant of others. Which segues us into the next couple of topics, which is handling misfortune and our relationships. Misfortune is a part of every life. In fact, this particular topic is one of the departures between the disciplines of Buddhism and the disciplines of Taoism. the Buddhists say that life is suffering. I don't quite go so far. But misfortune, however you want to look at it, is absolutely a part of living. You know, for as long as we have desires and attachments, we will suffer. But we choose to hang on to some of those desires and attachments, understanding that they're going to bring us suffering someday anyway. And if we're going to hang on to them, we might as well be positive about it. I have no intention whatsoever of giving up my wife and family. I'm very attached to them. I desire nothing but the best for them. But those attachments ultimately are going to make one of us suffer. In all likelihood, my wife will suffer first because I will probably die before she does. And that won't be pleasant for her. But the intervening years, hopefully years, between now and the day I drop dead on her, you know, hopefully for her will be full of joy and fun and wonderful things and the cultivation of her own path. And will make the suffering at the end a little easier to take and a little less painful. When we examine how we handle the occurrence of misfortune in our lives, it shines a very bright light on the state of our cultivation. Someone who's maturing in the process of cultivation handles misfortune appropriately. It has its proper place in life. And not even a catastrophe is necessarily viewed with a tremendous amount of extreme emotion or life upheaval. It's simply handled. The absence of those extremes, positive or negative, either one, is one of the indicators to that state of cultivation. So we can look at how misfortune affects us and see how things are going. I saved the best one for the last. Cultivating the Tao teachings is all about rectifying our lives and smoothing out our relationships. And so if we're cultivating successfully, our relationships are going to reflect that. By and large, we're going to get along with people, even the people who don't necessarily want to get along with us. We inherit the ability to be honest and forthcoming without being ruthless or scathing or sharp or piercing with other people. We find that other people will naturally look to us to lead, to make decisions, to be involved in where we're going and how we're going to get there. Not because we've forced ourselves on them or impressed upon them any desire to lead or make the decisions, but because by cultivating the Tao, one cultivates the personality of a leader, one who sets a proper example and makes the right kind of choices, somebody worthy of being trusted and followed. And so we can ask ourselves, you know, what's the quality of our relationships? Are they beneficial, good, and moving forward, or are we having problems? And the answer to those questions will tell us whether or not we are walking our path successfully. If we honestly answer ourselves and say that some of these areas require some refinement and improvement, we can always ask what it is we need to change. And the wonderful thing about this path is that we can change where it goes anytime we want. Part of that absence of very specific guidance sometimes is liberating because we can change where the path goes. There's no dogma that dictates where we have to go or how we have to get there. There is rather the suggestions and wisdom that says, you know, maybe you want to try going this way because the other way is pretty rough. We can all choose to walk over the rocks or walk through the grass either way. And we can choose to stay there for as long as we want. It is perfectly fine with the Great Tao if we decide we want to go upstream. But it sure is easier if we elect to go downstream and simply follow that wonderful flow. To the extent that we want to determine how difficult it can be, we are allowed to do that. And to the extent that we finally learn to follow the great flow of the Great Tao and eventually get to where we're going, we can do that too. I guess looking back over the last several years, there have been, you know, a lot of what I like to refer to as mile markers along that highway of life. And looking back, I realized that you know, the way my life's unfolded over time is the evidence of the path that I've walked. We all know people in our lives who either live their lives from one tremendous blessing to the next, from one success to the next. You know, people who deal effectively with both the positives and negatives of life, and who seem to always wind up on top one way or the other. And then we know people who live their lives from one train wreck to the next, where nothing ever goes right no matter what they do. I don't know about you guys, but every now and again I look at those two sets of folks and I wonder what the one group did to have it so good and what the other guy did to have it so bad. I don't think it's all due to their past life karma. I'm pretty sure a lot of it has to do with their present moment choices. But, you know, karma does exist. And in the here and now, it is as real and as present as it will be in future lifetimes and was in past lifetimes. I don't believe that our karma dictates that we're going to live our lives from one tragedy to the next for an entire lifetime's worth of living. I personally believe that karma is kind of an educational path. It's part of the core curriculum of learning to cultivate the teachings. I think ultimately, whether we live our lives from one set of blessings to the next or from one catastrophe to the next is a choice that we make. And we choose to take on the blessings or the catastrophes, either one. For me, I'd rather have the more positive times than the more negative times if I can possibly arrange for that to happen. Be that as it may, as cultivators of the Tao, we have a powerful set of tools that we can use to determine whether or not we are walking that wide, broad, easy path of the Tao. If we don't use them, that's our fault. And by using them, by utilizing that ability to examine our lives and the lives of others and see how it is that we're progressing, we can correct what needs fixing and refine what's been corrected. I'm not about to sit here and tell you that even in the areas where I think my life's doing really well, that there isn't room for improvement. I wouldn't dare presume to call myself anybody's guru or anybody's Buddha. That's just completely out there in left field. But compared to where my life used to be, I'm very, very happy with the results. And hardly wait to see what happens when I finally, deeply understand some of these things. And that is the thing, Every time I read a chapter of the Tao Te Ching, I understand something about it I didn't understand before, and I've read it over and over and over. The longer I'm at it, the better I understand it, the more I learn. And I think that process will probably continue for as long as I live. And so I use that observation of my life and the events that occur in it to try and improve that understanding, to further that education, and to keep things moving forward. And I don't ever forget that cultivation is a lifetime journey. This isn't something I'm going to master one day and then hang a little plaque up on the wall for. This is kind of a till the day you die sort of an adventure. But it's a wonderful adventure, and it does wonderful things in a human life. And so I hope that in some way this has been helpful for you. Hope I answered my son's question. And as always, thank you guys so much for letting me share with you. Thank you.
Well, Bill, I think you have answered your son's question. And I have some notes to convey back to you from Julie. Thank you, Bill. Your talk was spot on and very much what I ponder every day. For this, I thank you very deeply. From Tim, your son's question resulted in an excellent presentation. Bill, we have to be patient with progress, do as much as we can to move forward, but also understand that we don't have total control over how fast progress comes.
Amen.
From Alex, wonderful talk, Bill. Thank you for sharing these tools for measuring our progress with the teachings. Thanks, Alex. And in a moment, I want to add a few points about the measurements that I think you may find interesting. Also, Bill, from Bob, having been blessed with a long lifespan, which has enabled me to learn and grow, like yours, Bill, the wisdom of your words hit a home run. I hope that the younger participants in our Tao family are able to recognize that wisdom. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
And then from Gavin, I have thank you so much, Bill, and from Mike, thank you, Bill. That was very helpful. So, Bill, what you said about intuition, and what you said about how at a high level, when you cultivate to a certain degree, you develop your intuition to a very powerful level, and you can tell things about others that they would find uncanny. So that's very true. And actually, both you and I have been on the receiving end of that.
Yes.
And so I'm thinking like 10 years ago when we made that trip to Taiwan, you had stuff told to you that kind of raised the hackles. You were sort of like turning to me, looking totally bewildered and like, Derek, am I losing my mind? And I said that, well, actually, Bill, I have the same experience. Stuff that's been told to me that I can't quite square away with my own rigorous background in science and rational thinking and so on and so forth. So yeah, that does exist. It is possible, and people are constantly asking me questions about that because everybody is interested in knowing something more about their own future. You know, what's coming? What's in store for me? What if I do this? What if I do that? What do I need to watch out for? You know, what are some of the upcoming dangers that I should be aware of? Stuff like that. So I completely understand. Um,
You
so like
remember
I said,
what happened behind the bus that day, right over that at the rest stop?
yeah, that was your Twilight Zone moment. That's kind of when you thought that, have I stepped away from everyday reality and, gone into the Twilight Zone?
You had to be there though, because if you hadn't been, I wouldn't have understood a word she said.
Yeah. So anyhow, I've had similar experiences like that. I've seen other people have similar experiences. So the best fortune tellers, they will help you mitigate some upcoming danger. So one particular person, was told that there was a calamity ahead, that it would be auto accident, that it would be very serious, that he would be severely injured, perhaps even die, that the visual was that of uh, a lot of blood from his chest. So, so obviously he was interested in avoiding this. I think anyone would be interested. And so, happy to say that with the help of the fortune teller, he was able to mitigate it. And when he came back with the report, what he said was that, well, rather than the blood, all over my chest, one day he discovered that he had a pen that leaked on the front pocket of his shirt. So the date and time was within the range that was told to him. Now, of course, nobody rational could predict that his pen would leak on that particular day at that particular time. So he was amazed, and then he realized that the mitigation steps that he had done, the additional cultivation that he had done on himself to somehow sidestep the catastrophe, had worked to reduce it to just a laundry problem, from a life and death injury scenario to just a laundry problem.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I know. So in a very similar vein, I had a prediction as well for me. And it wasn't anything as serious as an auto accident. It was, more like a monetary loss. What it turns out to be, at around that time frame, my mailbox was broken into. So, at the time, Janice had a subscription to one of those music CD clubs. So that's what was taken, a bunch of music CDs. And I realized that the original prediction was actually something closer to home burglary, was a great loss, but it was mitigated to that extent. And I know that. I know that's most likely what it was because of the time frame, and also because, before that time and since that time, there's never been a problem with the mailbox. So as you are listening to these anecdotes, there is a lot more that I could tell you. That after a while, when you hear enough of these things that are happening, especially to people that you know, especially if you witness them yourself, you begin to question reality. You really do. Like, is it what we think it is? Is everything like materialistic and cause and effect in the physical universe? Gee, I'm not sure. Now, I know another master that you don't know, Bill. This is the typical fortune teller who has mastered the I Ching. They will usually ask for your birth date and time. So, and then they will do a bunch of calculations. It's similar to when astrologers compose a chart, and then they can go over a lot of details with you on what they see for you. So these master fortune tellers have different calculations that they do. There is another master that I know that you don't know, Bill, that he's at a level beyond those I Ching masters. He doesn't, like when people approach him and they ask him a question, and then they'll say, expecting that he's going to want to have their birth date and time, they'll say, okay, well, here's my birth date and time. And then he'll put up a hand and say, no need. He'll stop them. He'll say, no need. You don't have to give me your birth date and time. And then he does his calculations, and he's even more accurate than the other masters. So people ask him, well, how were you able to, quote unquote, calculate that? And he said, well, it's not an accident that you asked me that question the time at that exact time that you did. So what I do is that I perform the calculations based on the time that you asked the question.
Amazing.
Wow. So, and he was the gentleman who predicted the break-in for me. He was remarkable. What's that?
Was that Master Lin?
No, it's it's another person who prefers to remain unknown to most. I mean, he's swamped as it is with all these celebrities that flock to him through word of mouth. So he doesn't want me to give out his number. He doesn't. He calls every now and then to check up on me, and that's when I get to ask my questions. And I asked him previously. I sacrificed one of my opportunities to speak with him, and I asked a question on behalf of another Alex, not the Alex who presents, but Alex Chiang, who had some personal trouble at the time. I asked a question on his behalf, and the answer from this particular master was something that completely shocked him, even though the younger Alex is here in the United States, and this master is back in Taiwan, and doesn't know Alex at all.
Some of those guys are just scary.
Yeah, that's exactly what I say, and that's why Alex thought that it was exactly scary. But here's the big point, though. When it comes to Tao, he's very upfront about this. He says that there's when you get to a certain level of cultivation, he will completely lose his accuracy with you. He will still be completely accurate with everyone else, but not you. Okay, so I have seen him be completely inaccurate with just a few individuals, like just a small handful. Most everyone else, I would say 9 times out of 10, actually even better than that. It's more like 19 times out of 20. He's extremely spot on. And then there's that one person out of 20 for whom he will be completely inaccurate, and that person is invariably a long-time cultivator of the Tao. So I asked him about this, and he says, here's the reality of it. To know your future cannot possibly compare to the power to create the future that you want. So that one person out of 20 who has gone to a certain depth of Tao cultivation, they gain that ability to see where they're going in life, and they can determine where they're going. Okay, so, and I mentioned this, and I also mentioned previously about the golden rooster, new beginning, etc. So that's because one of my goals was to be able to get to a point where he is completely inaccurate with me, as you can probably imagine. Now, so that finally happened last year when
multiple times. I would say a consecutive series of 3 or 4 predictions all came out wrong. So that's when I knew that I was on the right track. Now, certainly a big difference from the me 10 years ago when I traveled to Taiwan with you, Bill. Now, Bill, I know that you have grown and developed as well. I cannot say how far you have come because, I'm not this particular master. If you was to make predictions for you and they all come true, then you're not quite there yet. But if they all come out to be false, then you know that you have attained that similar level.
I'm not prepared to take that wager just yet. but you've talked to me about this gentleman before, and like you, I'm striving for the day where he's wrong.
Exactly, and maybe we'll have another opportunity to travel abroad, at some point in time, and you will encounter people like that, and you will then see for yourself whether or not they are accurate.
Yes. Till then, I'm not worried about it, though. I just keep going.
Exactly. I do know a girl, very attractive. She looks like a model. She is also gifted with a great deal of intelligence, and he predicted for her that there was going to be a disaster one particular day. He was accurate to the day. Now, she knew that he could be inaccurate if he cultivated to a certain level. What she did not understand was how tough it was to cultivate yourself to that level. You have to do it over an extended period of time. So she wanted to go on a date. And using her great intelligence, she convinced herself that she was, wise and cultivated and in tune with the Tao, and therefore he was probably not accurate anyway. So she talked herself into going on the date. So she's with her boyfriend. And he's like riding a motorcycle, and she's behind him, having a great time. And he wipes out. They're both injured. And that was the exact thing that was predicted for her that she didn't listen to. So, and it's similar with Alex in that, even though he heard the fortune, he did not really take any action toward the mitigating solution that the master told him to take. So nothing changed for him. He still had to suffer for another length of time before he got freed of that particular karma.
And that's why I won't take that wager yet.
Well, keep working. I do think you're on the right path, so you just got to keep going. And who knows, one day when you have that opportunity, you will be ready.
I'm going to tell you that I know I'm on the right path because of what I've talked about today. Yes. I absolutely know the path is correct. But
yes.
Man, I have a hard time with ascribing any level of proficiency or prowess to myself, because I think doing that instantaneously says you're not there.
Right. And today's topic is going to be perfect for that. I'll be covering 66, my continuing coverage of 66, leading to the paraphrase, and a big emphasis in 66 is the Tao of humility. And on that note, I should probably switch back over to my side so I can do that presentation.
Probably, but thank you for your excellent discussion. I always like hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, and I hope that everyone listening in finds it to be of interest as well. And I also hope that you will take it as an aspiration for yourself, that you also want to cultivate to a point where you you are in the driver's seat, that you have the ability to see where you're going in terms of fate and destiny, and therefore you can determine that if you don't like the direction where things are going, that you can simply choose a different path, a better path, a path of the Tao.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架规格是一鞠躬，接班一鞠躬。Okay, everybody, we are done.
Participate in the Tao meeting by joining us online. For information, go to Taoism.net/Tao